And one day I realized I was having problems breathing, and so I just had to go in. And by the time I made it to the hospital, I could barely make out the sentence to say, I had to stop and breathe several times just to say I'm having trouble breathing. And they pulled me behind the curtain immediately and put me on oxygen, started looking at me. And pretty quickly, I could hear my wife on the other side of the curtain. She was saying, where's my husband? Where's my husband? And they said, ma'am, you have to leave. And she's like, where's my husband? We got him. You have to leave. Because, back then they weren't letting family in the hospital. And that was the last time I saw my wife for nearly 2 months.
Welcome to another episode of Executive Health and Life. I'm your host, Julian II. And as I always like to say when I'm doing an interview, I'm here with a fascinating guest. And as a little teaser of what we're going to talk about today, we are going to talk about, we're going to link, we're going to link sales and coffee dating and in general, just finding relationships. So my guest today is going to teach me a little bit about sales. He has a remarkable story, and he's also going to end up making me a better dater as I go out in the field here. So I'm excited about that. I hope you are. But if you're in a relationship, then you're going to be a better partner, husband, wife, all that good things. Now, my guest is the principal ally and founder of the marketing agency Allies for Me. And here's the thing, though. It's a marketing agency, but he can't sell. And he told me he can't sell. So this is what he did. This is kind of like biohacking, right? He created an environment where people want to buy. So he hacked his environment, hacked his selling process. This is the professional side of things. On the personal side, though, 6 weeks of his life are missing, gone, vanished, just out there. He was in a drug-induced coma. Many folks thought he couldn't hear them. And so they were just talking, saying all kinds of crazy things. The doctors kept speaking of his pending death, which is kind of weird. But his wife kept speaking life into him, which is most important, and salute to his wife. Eventually, he woke up, and he was terrified of the doctors. Presently, he's found a doctor he likes, thankfully. But his trust in his wife, most importantly, was through the roof, and I'm sure their relationship was even stronger after that moment. I'm speaking with none other than Craig Andrews. Craig, how's it going today?
It's going great, Julian. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Good to hear, man. So there's a lot to unpack there. It's a very weird, crazy situation. So as a little backstory, me and Craig met in Nashville maybe like a month ago or so, I think.
Yeah, right about.
Yeah. And we were just talking, I didn't know where it was going. We were just having coffee. And then all of a sudden he tells me, oh yeah, so I was in a coma for about 6 weeks and everything. I was like, what? And then he just kept unpacking it. And I was like, okay, we got to get this on the podcast, because this is, in times like this, the world's very negative, and there's a lot of talk of impending doom and gloom, and sometimes hope and inspiration and just is what we need to hear. And I think Craig's story is that. And it's a story of not really letting what somebody tells you, even if they're a quote unquote expert, tell you, and just not going by that. So I guess the origin story, before we even get into that, is what was your origin story before those 6 weeks?
Oh, before that. Yeah. Interesting, very, very indirect path through life. Not a single teacher I had in high school ever accused me of being a model student. And as a matter of fact, one told my parents, he said, he could do well if he actually tried. And so when I realized that my 2.54 GPA average wouldn't get me into any university anybody had ever heard of, I thought, well, let me try something different. And I joined the Marine Corps and ran into my first great salesman. I went in to sign up for 3 years, maybe 4, and doggone if the guy didn't get me hooked in 6. Signed up for 6 years straight out of the chute. It was a great time. It was a blast, wonderful people. And when I was stationed over in Japan right before I was supposed to get out. And I thought, I like being creative. I want to create things. So I applied to go to engineering school and actually wrote my application. This is before the internet. Actually, not technically before the internet, but before anybody knew it existed. And I got an application. I filled it out, walked it down to a Japanese post office, mailed it from Japanese post office, got back to the U.S. and started at North Carolina State University. And I got a master's degree in electrical engineering under my belt, and I had a great job. I was a design job. I was designing mobile phones in the 1990s, and that's when I discovered it's not a place to be creative. Engineering is not a creative enterprise, and so I thought, well, let me try something a little different, and I started marketing semiconductors for mobile phones. So I still had foot in the technical world. But I was doing a lot more creative things, which I enjoyed, and did really well at that. Drove over $500 million of revenue. Been in the, at least at the time, were the world's largest mobile phone makers. At the time, it was Ericsson, Nokia, Motorola, LG, Apple. I've been to Apple. They were a little later to the game, and obviously came on strong. And so that used to be my world, but I knew I was watching margin pressure. We just had insane margin pressure for a consumer market. It's just always tough. We basically had to take half our cost out of our product every single year just to be able to hit our margin goals for the investors. And I knew the day was coming that they would say, hey, you're not flying business class to Asia anymore. You're flying coach. And I decided early on, I was like, when that day comes, I'm done. And sure enough, it came. And it was kind of funny at the time. I thought, I've been really, really good at marketing, high tech. And I thought, well, let me share my genius with the rest of the world. And so I started doing more general marketing. And it's funny, when I run across my buddies from the semiconductor world today, and they ask me what I've been up to, I tell them I've spent the last decade learning how little I know about marketing. It's been an interesting journey, and it's kind of counter to what you would expect. You would think when you have hundreds of millions of dollars on the line, you would think that you're using some of the most advanced marketing strategies and techniques. You're really not. It's amazing. It's amazingly primitive.
Is that because usually the larger organizations are a little more archaic, a little more rigid in their processes and the way they go about things, so they're not able to be as nimble and move as, say, somebody that's more of a small business owner and has a small team where they can do things on the fly and they can be a little more creative?
It's probably a couple things. The one, I think it's just, it's kind of a legacy industry, and they have this, they have the whole, this is the way we've always done it. But two, I would say it's a lack of understanding of what really moves people. And so back when I was in that world, my most successful product, it was the designer built just this amazing product. It was a dream to market. But when I was putting together the launch package for it, I looked at a company, Hewlett Packard. You probably think of them as a computer and printer company, but they used to do test and measurement. They spun off that division, and that's now called Keysight. But I looked at Hewlett Packard, and I thought, it's really interesting. Whenever you need a piece of measurement equipment, the first phone call you make is Hewlett Packard. And they actually didn't necessarily have the best equipment, but they were always the first phone call you made. And I started looking at that. I was like, how did they do this? And I started breaking it down. I realized, oh, I got it. It's not about the spec sheet. So, back to your question, most of these tech companies, they think it's a battle of data sheets and prices. It's, I have a better data sheet on this, and I have a better price. And when I looked at what Hewlett Packard had done, it became really clear what I needed to set as my strategy. And so when I was launching this strategy, I was still fairly new at this company. And one of the things I'd learned was we had a habit of sampling parts to customers before we fully understood them. And so the customers would take the parts, they'd put them in their mobile phones, call us up and say, hey, your part's doing this weird thing in my phone. Are you aware of this? And we'd say, let me get back to you. And we go investigate, like, doggone if it isn't doing that weird thing.
Uh-huh.
And so we developed a reputation of sampling parts that we didn't understand. So that was the first, if we think about it as a three-legged stool, that was the first leg in the stool. This process was, before we launched this product, we're going to take more data on this part than we have any other part that we've ever launched. We're going to take the data and we're going to put it on a CD. And anytime we go visit a customer to sample the part, they're going to get a CD with more data than they've ever gotten from us, ever. And it was really interesting when we went out and sampled it. You could see the jadedness on the customers. They're like, well, how does it perform on this? And I'd say, I've got this CD here. I'm going to show you how to find this data. We're going to pull it right up. We're going to look at the data, and I'm going to leave the CD with you. And I'd put it in the computer. This is back when laptops still had CD drives. And I'd pull it up and I'd show them exactly how to find it. And they're like, okay. And it was funny. They looked maybe even a little frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, what about this? And I would pull that and I'd say, here it is. Let's go dig it up and show them how to find it. They'd always ask me 3 questions. After the 3rd question, the message was received. We understand this part. We're not going to surprise you with things like we have in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one part of the marketing that had nothing to do about price or data sheets. It was, we want you to know we've made a change. You can now trust us in an area that you didn't previously trust us. The second leg in the stool for that campaign was engineers, which were our customers, have this insatiable desire to learn. And so I thought, okay, as a part of this strategy, and that's what I saw Hewlett-Packard doing. They spent so much time educating their customers in ways that didn't directly apply to sales. And so that you always saw them as the fount of knowledge that would make you a better engineer. And so that's one of the big reasons they always got the first phone call. So we put together a whole bunch of education and really pushed the envelope on some things to make the engineers better engineers. And that was the second leg in the stool. The third leg was engineering is hard work. They work long hours and it's a lot of stress. We are going to make tools that make it easy to use our parts. So basically the choice they'll have is if they use one of our parts, they get to go home at 5. If they use one of our competitors' parts, they have to work late. And so it was about making their life easier. Now, the product on its own was a great product, but you notice nothing in that strategy was about facts, figures, data sheets, or price.
Mm-hmm.
And when we launched, we knocked our competitors backwards for 2 years. We started hiring our competitors' sales guys. And I remember asking one, I said, hey, why'd you come join us? And he said, I haven't been able to sell anything for 2 years.
Oh, wow. Wow. What a campaign.
Yeah.
What a campaign. I mean, that's a lesson that, especially the second and third lesson, those are lessons that I don't care what industry you're in, you can immediately apply. When you think about, they're top of mind. And so when I hear that the second lesson, they're top of mind, but they're indirectly establishing brand dominance without just doing it in your face. But it's more of a covert way of doing it because they're just educating you about a lot of things. Yeah. But you're still seeing their brand everywhere. You're still seeing them. And so I think about, you can apply this for people that I think about, people that can go on social media, pick one of these platforms and continually just share information, continually share life stories. Doesn't necessarily always have to be about your product. Doesn't necessarily have to be you telling them, hey, this little widget or tool that we have, this is, you can just get in there and share. And when the time comes for anything remotely close to what you do, you're probably going to be top of mind because they've seen you so much.
Right.
And then the third one is to make it easy. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. Most of us humans are lazy and like convenience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, that's excellent. To knock someone out for 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. And then of course we did what all companies did. We got complacent, and we thought we were the top king of the hill. We'd never be knocked off. And I remember one day I walked into my general manager's office and I said, Joe, I said, I'm a little bit worried. He said, why? I said, I think our competitor, which was, I think, Connexent at the time. I said, I think Connexent is hungrier than we are. I think they're more aggressive than we are.
Mm-hmm.
He actually got angry with me. He threw me out of his office. He's like, that's not true. We're hungry. We're aggressive. We're blah, 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 blah. And within 8 months, we had to deploy one of our most valuable assets to Korea, spent a lot of money, lost a lot in the process. And his job was to hang on to every piece of business at Samsung that we possibly could until we could make up the difference, because we'd fallen asleep and our competitor caught up with us.
Wow. That's crazy. When I think about the, there's an old Tiger Woods article, and this was written during his peak when he was just absolutely just crushing the competition. He had these, it's a Newsmax or Newsweek article. I forgot. It's a long time ago, but he had his top 5 rules for being a dominator. I have it. I have those rules on my phone.
Yeah.
Number 5 was never ever be satisfied in terms of being a dominator. And so that just kind of reminded me again we can't really rest on our laurels, and we can never ever be satisfied, because then that's how. I don't know if I really believe in maintenance and just staying somewhere. You're either growing or you're going the other way.
Yeah, and here's a real shortcut. If you're number one in your market, there's somebody that almost certainly is hungrier than you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're number one, there's somebody out there eyeballing your market share, and they're trying to figure out how to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And a year ago when I was telling people Google will not stay on top forever, they said, Craig, you're nuts. They can't be knocked down. They're the king. They're insurmountable. Nobody will ever knock them down. And here we are 1 year later, and how much the conversation has changed.
I mean, I think it's hard for people to see the future because it's hard for them to conceptualize anything possibly being different. I mean, I think about health as well. I mean, if you tell someone, imagine yourself 1 year out and a bunch of things being completely different than what they are now, it's hard for people to see that because they're so connected to just the physical and just what they see right now.
Yeah.
That you can't see anything different. So I mean, I can see that.
Yeah. And I think what I would say is find frameworks, that's what we do. And I still have a couple degrees in engineering, so there's some habits I can't abandon,
mm-hmm.
and that is looking for frameworks that give predictable results. And so the framework that let me, there were just a few factors I was looking at with Google, and I was like, this won't stand forever. And it was funny, I've been around long enough that I heard everybody saying exactly the same thing about Microsoft in the 1990s. Everybody said Microsoft can never be knocked down.
Mm-hmm.
And the framework is simply, this if you're number one, there's somebody out there that wants your market share.
Mm-hmm.
And the more comfortable you make yourself, the more available you make someone else to come in and steal it. And here's a great example with Microsoft. They even, in the last 10, 15 years, Microsoft got really comfortable with their Microsoft Exchange server. It was an on-premise server that managed email. They made a ton of money off it. And they just felt like, okay, this is it. We don't need to evolve. And then Google came along with Google. I think the latest name for it is Google Workspaces. And Microsoft started losing customers by the millions because they had this cash cow. They had this thing defending they had this thing making all this revenue, and they didn't try to obsolete themselves. And one of the stories I've heard about Apple was, anybody who's worked with Apple knows that they're very siloed. If you're on one project, you have no idea what's going on in the rest of the company. And if you tell anybody in the rest of the company what's going on your project, you're going to get fired immediately. At least that's the way it used to be. And so Steve Jobs went to the guy who was in charge of the MacBooks. And he said, you've got a competitor coming your way. It's an internal competitor. And they're going to shake up your world. You need to come up with a solution that's lightweight, has all day battery life. And I'm sure he gave him a couple other parameters. But what happened was, what he was talking about was the iPad, was the introduction of the iPad. And he realized that was going to steal some of the laptop business. So he went to the guy who was in charge of the laptop business and said, you've got a competitor coming your way. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'll tell you it's from within the company. But you'd better figure out weight and battery life. Well, that was the genesis that brought about the MacBook Air.
Oh.
The MacBook Air, which is still a phenomenal product, came because Apple was willing to obsolete something that was a cash cow for their business.
Huh. I have a MacBook Air. That's what I'm using right now. Wow. Huh. I never knew that. So that's why I'm kind of like pausing here. That's how that happened. I'm always curious on how certain products, how their origin stories come. I would imagine that a lot of them are kind of like the story you just told me.
Yeah, and it's what ends up happening is people defend their turf. So we saw that with Microsoft. I think we've seen that with Google. Google, and I think Google's in real trouble. Google's nothing without their ad business.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw some numbers the other day. I think it's either their Chrome browser or search, both. They lost somewhere between 5 or 10% market share this year.
That's huge.
Just insane numbers. And their competitor, Microsoft can exist without Bing. Mm-hmm. Google can't exist without search.
Yeah, they better hope. What's it? The AI thing, Bard. They better hope it. It turns out really well, well, or they will have a little struggle. But moving on now, let's go to your hospital situation and the 6 weeks that you were missing. So, I guess initially, what put you in the hospital for 6 weeks?
Yeah, so this was August 2021. I had COVID. My wife and I got sick the same day, and it was a beast. And one day I realized I was having problems breathing, and so I just had to go in. And by the time I made it to the hospital, I could barely make out the sentence to say, I had to stop and breathe several times just to say I'm having trouble breathing. And they pulled me behind the curtain immediately and put me on oxygen, started looking at me. And pretty quickly, I could hear my wife on the other side of the curtain. She was saying, where's my husband? Where's my husband? And they said, ma'am, you have to leave. And she's like, where's my husband? We got him. You have to leave. Because, back then they weren't letting family in the hospital. And that was the last time I saw my wife for nearly 2 months.
Wow.
And 11 days later, they shot me full of morphine. Didn't tell me they were going to do that. I wish they had. I would have said, no, thank you. Apparently morphine and respiration don't go hand in hand.
Yeah.
They shot me. And they gave me morphine a couple days earlier. And I actually texted my wife saying they gave me morphine today. Bad plan. I had to spend the whole morning on my stomach. And the meaning there is your lungs are in the back of your chest cavity. And when you're on I was able to get more oxygen in my lungs by laying on my stomach, but it was very uncomfortable because I had an oxygen mask on my face and it had all these, sensors and what have you hooked up to my body. So I already knew morphine was bad, and but they shot me full of morphine again, a lot more this time. And several hours later, they called my wife and said, we need to put your husband on the ventilator. And she said, well, he doesn't want to go on the ventilator. And she heard me screaming in the background, no ventilator, no ventilator. And they laughed at her and they said, if he didn't go on the ventilator, he'll be dead in 24 hours. And she said, well, how many people have you had survive on the ventilator? And he said, none have survived. So this was the Delta variant of COVID. And the rule was, if you went on the ventilator with Delta, you died.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I was the first one to leave the ICU alive. And I checked. I know some people in that hospital system. And from what I understand, I'm one of single digits numbers of people in the entire city of Austin that survived the ventilator with Delta. And my wife said that, well, if he's going to die, he's not going to die alone. And they said, well, you can't come in. She said, wrong answer. So she bullied her way in. They got to spend an hour a day. They gave her an hour a day, and she'd come in, she would sing to me, and she'd pray over me, and she'd say words of encouragement. And 6 weeks later, I woke up, and like you said, my trust in the doctors had plummeted, fell through the floor. My trust in my wife went through the roof. And as I started piecing things together, it was really interesting. First week and a half that I was awake, my mind was really scrambled. I believed some things about the world that just not only weren't true, weren't even close to true. And so I called her over and I said, hey, so I'm going to tell you some things. And I started figuring, when I was watching people's reactions, I realized I was saying things that, from their perspective that's just nuts. Mm-hmm. And it really got me nervous, because I was like, if they think I've lost my mind, they're going to take away privileges. Mm-hmm. And and so I told her, I'm going to tell you some things, and I need you to tell me if these are true. I said, have we been in Louisiana? And she said, no, I haven't been in Louisiana. Why do you ask? And I start telling her what had been going on in my world, things I believed were true. I had been at a few resorts in Louisiana convalescing. I'd been fishing in Louisiana. I had a condo, high-rise condo in Louisiana. I didn't think they have many of those in Louisiana, but I have one. And I tell her this. I say, at one point when I was at one of these resorts, you came in, you put your hand on my left shoulder, and you said, Craig, this is Karen. I'm your wife. It's going to be okay. And she sat back and she said, Craig, I said those exact words to you when you were in your coma.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so after I got out of the hospital, I started piecing things together, because also when I woke up, when my mind was scrambled, the docs would come and they'd want to do something. And if the docs were asking, there was a lot that didn't make sense. But the one thing I knew was I didn't trust them. And so I'd always tell them no. And so they'd have to go through my wife, and she'd come to me and she'd say, hey, the doctors want to do such and such. I'd look at her and I'd say, is it safe? And she's like, yeah, it's safe. And I was like, okay. And looking at some of these things in hindsight, they were immensely reasonable, immensely sensible. But, with a scrambled brain, the only thing I knew was I didn't trust the doctors. Mm-hmm. So whatever they asked, I said no. And it was those messages that they had delivered while I was asleep and they thought I couldn't hear. And it reminded me of this Maya Angelou quote that goes, people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And when I took the rest of the year off, I was in the hospital 3 months from August 10th to November 6th. Mm-hmm. And when I got out of the hospital, I took the rest of the year off because I had to learn how to walk again. I'd lost 40 pounds in the hospital. My muscles had all atrophied. I had to learn how to walk again, how to bathe again, everything. I had to learn it from scratch. And so I took the rest of the year off to focus on recovery. But I kept thinking about this, and I realized, we do this thing. You mentioned this earlier. It's a coffee date, sort of a coffee date that leads to high ticket sales. We called it a first time offer. And we realized the way we had that structured, there's an element where we're influencing the way people feel. Basically we come along, it's a mini project where we come along and we help them solve a small problem, and it leads to them hiring us to solve a big problem. And the thing that really hit me was, oh my goodness, that's like that Maya Angelou quote. And it's like what happened to me in the hospital is, in a very short period of time, you can take a total stranger and build enormous amount of trust with them just by doing one of these little mini projects. And the thing is, all of a sudden, you don't even have to sell. All you have to do is come in, help them solve a small problem, help them see the path to solving their big problem. And then they start asking you, hey, what's the next steps? What do we need to do? How do we get started?
That can be applied to a lot of things again in life, right there. What you just shared, and it's almost like, I think about just first impressions as well when I hear this, and just kind of how that can shape the course of a relationship or stop any type of relationship from even happening. Just that initial conversation, that initial 5 minutes.
Yeah,
and it's oftentimes it is the small things, the micro, that ultimately culminates and determines the macro. I think about your situation, and think about if the physicians came to your wife in a more respectful tone, and they just didn't come from, I have the white coat on, I have the title, so I know everything. But I actually, even if I did think I knew everything, but I at least came with you with respect, and came with you and talked to you in a way that made it seem like you were involved in decision making as well.
Yeah.
And how that would have changed things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the going through what I went through, one of the hardest things I've done in life. It still has some lingering health effects. My lungs are still crap. I still have neuropathy in my feet. But the things that came out of it, one, like you suggested earlier, it absolutely transformed my relationship with my wife. But it also changed the way I view doctors, with a clearer mind. And this year alone, we're just like roughly halfway through the year. And this year alone, I've already had 2 different doctors tell me things that were verifiably false. And that had pretty big implications, and one, I was wrecking my kidneys, and I was damaging my kidneys because I was doing this thing called Camp Gladiator. It's a outdoor kind of CrossFit training thing. And the doc kept saying, I kept asking, is this the cause? And she's like, no, it's not the cause. And I kept doing research, and I had people coming up to me saying, Craig, I think you're overstressing your body, and I think that's the cause. Well, finally, I just took 3 weeks off from Camp Gladiator without her knowledge, went back, got another blood test, and lo and behold, that blood test showed everything improving. And, and so one of the benefits of going through what I went through is I've taken a lot more responsibility for my own health. Mm-hmm. And I don't take what the doctors say at face value. It's kind of the old say, trust but verify. And that's been valuable. I have a new doctor now that I'm real happy with. But yeah, I've had 2 different doctors in 1 year. One of them I was only met with 5 times. It was a specialist. 5 times or 4 times? 4 times, I think. Only met with her 4 times. 3 out of 4 visits, she spread medical misinformation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. And a lot of times, depending on the topic and everything, it's hard to stay up to date on so much information. I have friends in that world, and some are just private practice and cash base, and some are usually an employee of the hospital or something. And usually the ones that are in that system, you don't really have time to keep staying up to date on research and reading, and because the way the system is, you're inundated with people all the time, and it's really hard to even develop a personal relationship because you don't have a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
It's in and out. So it's a system that is not good. And that's me being nice. I try to be nice about it. I usually don't go in on anything unless I'm just provoked. I guess that's the diplomat in me. And so, but it's not good. It's it's a lot of people at fault as well. So I try to offer a little grace, but there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of ego involved in that world as well. And that ego is, when you get the titles, and I mean, there's PhDs who, they're PhDs, so they know everything. So I think that's a human thing in general, is that if people have titles, they start to kind of get this superiority complex. It's a very strange thing. But I even tell people this myself, that a lot of times when people are asking me for advice or something, that I might say something, but go look for yourself, because that's the whole premise of the Health 1.0 and the Health 2.0 world. The Health 2.0 world is we're all N of one. We all share pretty close genes, but there's a 0.01% that's different. And that's a huge thing, actually. And so what works for you is not going to work for me. The activity that I do right now is probably not going to be for you right now, because we have different life situations and different paths that we're coming from. So you have to account for all of those things right there. So, and that type of systems approach is not going to be in a more traditional setting. That's probably the biggest issue of the whole thing right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the challenge I run into is, and when I meet with a new doc, I tell them this, and it's funny, I can tell which ones take me seriously and which ones don't. And I tell them, I said, I am not like your other patients. I survived 25 days on the ventilator. It changed my body. The assumptions that you make about other patients don't always apply to me.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't treat me like a average patient. I'm not. And, and that's where we got in trouble, where, my doc was telling me, no, just keep at Camp Gladiator. Well, no, I have compromised lungs, and and apparently, the kidneys like oxygen, and and somebody in reasonable health, with reasonable lungs, that's not going to be an issue. Their lungs and their heart generate enough oxygen, enough blood flow to the kidneys to keep them oxygenated.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the case in my body, at least not now. I'm hoping that changes. And so, yeah, it's tough. It's hard. And like I said, I'm very thankful I have a doctor now who, when I first met with him, I just told him, I said, hey, I'm not like everybody else. And he's like, no. And he's like, I get it. And he explained, I told him about the creatinine, and he's like, well, here's why this is going on. And he just gave me an incredibly in-depth explanation using kind of a 8th grade vocabulary,
mm-hmm.
actually probably a 5th grade vocabulary, to explain what was going on. I was like, okay, that's when I know I'm dealing with somebody who truly knows their craft, is when they can make complex simple, and they don't have to use a whole bunch of crazy Latin words.
And he probably paid attention to the first time offer. He paid attention to that philosophy, and he kept those principles in mind, which, I don't know if that's your market, but I'm sure they can, that's a place that could definitely use the idea of a first time offer, even if you got to call it a little something different, because it's really, when I think about that, it's really about making a good first impression, building trust to move to the next stage of whatever the mission and goal is. Now, speaking of that, we talked a little bit about what a FTO is. What are some of the key ingredients? Picture this like a smoothie, right?
Yep.
You're throwing some ingredients in there. You're going to blend it up, and when you're done, boom, there's your smoothie. So in this case, this is our first time offer, and this is applicable to many disciplines. So what are some of the essential elements that you think belong in there?
Yeah. So first is, it has to be an impulse purchase. That means the coins in the cushion in your couch, the money in your wallet, or the B2B equivalent of that. So one of the measures is, if you present the offer and whoever you're presenting it to has to ask anybody for permission to spend that money, it's priced too high. You want it to be an amount of money that, Yeah, and just some rough numbers, if we're talking B2B, and this is going to shock some of your audience, we're saying less than $500 because anybody that has any decision-making authority in an organization has authority to spend $500 without getting anybody's permission. Furthermore, nobody's ever going to hunt them down to say, hey, how did you spend that $500? Did we get our money's worth for it? It's just something that's they can spend it, never have to worry about it. The next thing is it has to deliver a disproportionate amount of value to price. And so we usually aim for 10x. So if we're doing a first-time offer for $500, we're trying to pack $5,000 of value into that offer. I mean $5,000 of real value, not some crazy offer stack where you look at something arbitrarily assigning a value that's probably not realistic. We're talking $5,000 of real value. The next thing is it has to solve a problem. And this is one of the key trust building elements, because when you come along someone and help them solve a small problem in their life, that builds trust at hyper accelerated rates. But you don't want to solve all their problems because they'll never advance to your core offer. You're probably going to lose money on your first time offer, which is okay as long as you make money on your core offer that ever compensates for that, and usually significantly so. So you want to leave problems unsolved and you want to naturally advance to the next step. And when you're thinking about that, we work exclusively with people that have high ticket products or services. And so those are what we would say are complex core offers. And so the complexity of your first time offer has to match the complexity of your core offer. And so we found that should be like 3 to 5 deliverables. And those 3 to 5 deliverables should represent 3 to 5 milestones that move them 3 to 5 steps closer to their final goal.
Okay. Makes sense. So the world we live in right now, inflation's up right now. It's at a certain percentage, probably a little higher. That's another topic for discussion. There's been a recession hype for probably the last 8 months. They treat recession talk like almost like an Avengers movie that's coming out soon. Just keep on hyping it up and everything. So that's very strange to me as well. And it's all this economy talk, and business is slowing down. You hear commercial real estate is struggling, or soon it should start to struggle a lot. And so they said it's hard to do business right now. It's hard. People are worried about their jobs. So what do you say to people when they see a slowdown in sales, or it's a slow economy, a bad economy, all of those things in one? What's your mentality around that? Because you're in this world.
Yep. Yeah. So the sales have gotten harder, especially for high ticket things. It's conservatism around spending. When people get scared, they start conserving cash, but they don't stop spending. I mean, so we can go back and look in the Great Depression and find companies that were founded back then. Walt Disney Corporation was founded, I believe, in 1931, right in the middle of the Great Depression. And that's really interesting because at a time where people were starving and they were having trouble affording buying food. I mean, my dad grew up in the Great Depression, and he remembers my grandma chasing a chicken through the backyard that had gotten loose. That chicken was going to be dinner. And at the time he thought, why is she going to all this work to catch this chicken? Well, it's because they couldn't afford another chicken. In that environment, they would take some of their scarce money and they would give it to Disney for entertainment because the pain of the world was so tough. They needed a little bit of escape. And so if an entertainment company can be founded during the Great Depression, there are opportunities to be found even during recession. And if we go back to the Great Recession of 13 years ago, there were multiple multi-billion-dollar companies that were founded. Slack was founded, Uber was founded, Instagram, WhatsApp. All 4 of those companies are multi-billion-dollar companies that were founded during the Great Recession. So people do and will spend money during this time. Your job, if you're doing sales or marketing, either one, is harder. And so what I would say is you need to have a unfair advantage. And that's, we believe the first time offer is that unfair advantage, because what it does is it moves people from inaction, where they're kind of stuck in fear, to action. And something magical happens when somebody gives you money, even as little as $500 for, a big B2B problem. It starts flipping levers in their head. And there's a guy named Robert Cialdini that laid out six principles of influence, and one of them was consistency. And that says that once somebody acts like a customer once, probability that they'll act like a customer again goes up significantly. Mm-hmm. And so for folks facing this tough time, I would say figure out the first time offer for your business, because it's a game changer. And that will move people from inaction to action.
And I like that. I think that's a great way to culminate that aspect. And so as we kind of get ready to wrap this up a little bit, what's the future hold for you? What are you most excited about?
Well, two things. Professionally, we've been talking to folks about these first time offers, and probably we've been doing them for years, but right now they just seem to really be resonating. And so we're helping people build those. Got a couple full day strategies here in the next 2 weeks, helping multiple companies build their own custom first time offer. So that's exciting. From a personal standpoint, just continuing to work on my health, continuing to recover. I was at Camp Gladiator last night, and it's hard, but bit by bit, I'm able to hang with the rest of the crowd, and not fully, but the deficit between where I am and where they are is shrinking, and that's exciting.
Yeah, and I think this is it's a great story for people to hear, and you kind of just started where you were, you did what you could, and you built up from there. But like anything in life, it's not going to be a linear path, so you have to take a few steps back with your training, and then keep moving forward again. But I think that's how everything is.
Well, and let me tie this back to, you remember I said, if you're number one in your market, mm-hmm. your competitor's probably hungrier than you. Mm-hmm. So when I first went out to Camp Gladiator, everybody was ahead of where I was. And I wanted a health that reflected theirs a lot more. And it's funny, my Camp Gladiator coach told me the other day, he said, Craig, you're now faster than 80% of the campers out here. And he said, the only thing holding you back is your lungs. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't used to be 80% faster. I was the one pulling up the rear. And it's funny. Last night I was thinking about this because I went to a different location. It had some of the people I knew, but some different people. And they're sitting there watching me, and I'm thinking, you're taking for granted what I'm pushing myself to the very limits to regain. And when I do regain it, then you better watch out. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pass you.
That's the attitude I like.
Yeah.
I love that attitude. That's the attitude I like. I had some kids at the gym, and they're like, we're going to get to your level. And I was like, I don't know about that, because I'm not going to let you get there. Yeah. Yeah. Like you're not going to do it. And so, but that's healthy competition. And it's a way, once again, to allow yourself to never be satisfied, because there's always another step. There's always a continual evolution. And I think that's the beauty about health. That's kind of how I look at this now, is that there's not an endpoint. There's not an endpoint destination. It's just this continual evolution cycle that you're just going to continually evolving yourself into being the best version that you can possibly be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Craig, I enjoyed this episode a lot. I think listeners will probably take a lot of different things out of this. I think this is something where you listen to it and you really got to let a lot of the principles marinate in your head, because you can see yourself and you can hear some of these stories and lessons, and you can really apply them to a lot of things that the typical individual is going to go through or will go through. And so I really love that. Where can listeners keep up with you at?
So they can find us at our website, allies4me.com. That's spelled ALLIES, the number 4, ME.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. But Julian, I've got a gift for your audience. So we've
Okay,
been
I love gifts.
all right. Well, we've been talking about these first time offers, and I'll tell you, they are hard. They are hard. They look simple, but they're hard. My first one failed. My second one failed. My third one failed a little less. And so, and it took me about 18 months just to start getting it working. And then, I've refined it over the last 5 years. And so I've put some of these lessons together in a guide and a course. So if they go to our website, allies4me.com/exec health and life, that's all one word, all lowercase, exec health and life, they will be able to sign up for these two things. The course, the guide helps you skip some of the mistakes I made. The course is self-paced. We're only given 23 days access. And the reason for that is we study human behavior. And we know that if we just say, hey, here's a free course, sign up, people sign up and they'll never show up. They'll plan to do it next month. And then another month will pass. They'll never do it. We want to see lives changed. And so we put a little 23-day limit that gives you plenty of time to go through the material, but we can see it in the analytics. I had somebody sign up for that yesterday, and boy, they just went and they consumed everything instantly. And that's the thing that we want, is we want to see lives change. So that's why we put that limit on there.
Okay. I thought it was 23 because Michael Jordan was your favorite player.
Oh, no. He went to Chapel Hill.
I know. That's why I said that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we never had Jordan of our own. There was, what was his name? Tom, is it Gugliotta? He had.
David. Yeah, David. Did David Thompson go to NC State?
Maybe, I don't know that name.
Maybe he went to Houston. I don't remember. I think David Thompson went to NC State. I don't remember. So the basketball people, don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, we never had. Yeah, and NC State is. Yeah, unfortunately, we always have some people where, our athletic program is kind of like, yeah, we're almost as good as, as the folks down the street.
Yeah, you got some tough competition down the street.
But, at least in the NFL, we've placed some heavyweights. Torrey Holt's an NC State grad.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Cowher, former Steelers coach. He's actually an NC State grad. He lives in Raleigh today.
Okay. So, yeah, you got a little bit.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I like the name Wolfpack though. So you got that going. You got that going for you. Got a very fantastic logo. So, but anyway, once again, Craig, thank you so much for joining me. I will have that link in there for the people who are watching, the people who are watching this later, maybe a year from now, maybe 2 weeks from now, maybe a week from now, and et cetera, and all that good stuff. Anyway, as always, stay awesome, everyone. Be limitless and go be the CEO of your health and your life. Peace.